In the heart of the Ixarian fortress, beneath 20 miles of steel and gravity locks, there was a prisoner that no species dared to speak of, let alone approach. It was not kept alive out of mercy, nor studied out of curiosity. It was buried, entombed in technologies designed to suppress suns and shatter minds. And yet, even caged, it breathed a terror into the air so sharp that visiting dignitaries refused to enter the same continent as the prison itself. They called it Cell Zero. No one who had ever gazed into its depths had returned the same. The creature inside had been alive before the first councils had formed, before the first galactic wars had spilled their rivers of blood. It was, according to the classified files, a remnant of a war so ancient even the stars themselves had shifted in the sky since its last battlefield. It had no known name, no species, just a series of broken designations across forgotten languages, the Endmaker, the Pale Fire, the Walking Extinction. And now a human had come, not a warlord, not a soldier, not even a scientist, just a man with a visitor's badge and a quiet look in his green eyes. Evan Cross. The guards tried to stop him at every checkpoint, whispering warnings, recounting ghost stories. But Evan smiled the same way a man smiles at a storm cloud, unbothered, and flashed his clearance. Codes one after another. Every system, by some twisted political accident or divine mistake, allowed him passage. They watched in horror as he passed the last barrier, standing alone before the final corridor. The air grew heavier with every step. Lights flickered. Reality itself seemed to bend around the thick alloy walls, as if refusing to witness what lay beyond. At the end of the hallway stood the vault door of Cell Zero. It wasn't a door, it was a warning carved into existence. Multi-layered force fields, pulse dampeners, and physical locks stacked on top of one another, forming a barrier that could survive the death of a planet. Across the vault's surface, etched in burning letters older than human memory, was a single phrase: "Not dead, not safe." Evan pressed his hand against the scanner. A low rumble shook the floor as the barriers began to disengage one by one. A groaning metallic sound echoed like a dying titan in the void. Behind the thick, reinforced glass of the final chamber, movement. The creature sat cross-legged at the center of the room, motionless, its form cloaked in shadow. Even with the lights at maximum intensity, its figure seemed to drink in the illumination, swallowing it into an abyss of darkness. Armor, if it could be called that, clung to it. Like bone and molten stone fused together, etched with scars and cracks that whispered of wars older than dust. Chains thick as tree trunks bound its limbs to the floor, thrumming softly with suppression fields, strong enough to immobilize mountains. Yet even chained, even starved of power for centuries, it radiated something so alien, so wrong, that the subconscious screamed in the back of Evan's mind to turn, run, flee. He didn't. Instead, Evan Cross stepped forward, casual, almost lazy, as if he were approaching a lazy lion sleeping in the afternoon sun, not a myth capable of annihilating worlds. Beyond the glass, something shifted, a slow tilt of the head. A noise, soft, barely audible, like old leather stretching after centuries of stillness. The guards watching from the observation deck gasped. Some stumbled back. One fainted. And then, for the first time in an era lost to history, the ancient warrior raised its head. Two eyes opened, not eyes like humans had. These were windows into storms, into burning fields of ancient wars, into the void where civilizations ended screaming. They fixed, unblinking, onto Evan Cross. For one infinite heartbeat, all of existence held its breath, and Evan smiled. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The creature's gaze pinned Evan where he stood, and the corridors, the fortress, even the galaxy outside seemed to shrink into nothingness. There was no sound, no humming lights, no breathing guards, no distant security alarms, only the endless burning stare of something that had seen galaxies drown. Evan's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct, every cell in his body, screamed that he was prey, that the creature watching him was older than laws, older than mercy, and had forgotten how to be anything but a weapon. Still, he smiled, and he spoke, his voice casual, as if greeting a neighbor across a fence. "Hey," Evan said, "you got a name, or should I just keep calling you Big Guy?" The warrior blinked once, so slowly it looked almost mechanical. A shift in its massive shoulders, a slight tightening of the chains, the only signs of life. High, above, in the surveillance control room, alarms flared silently. Officers barked into radios. Orders were screamed across 7 different languages. "Get him out of there. Seal the chamber. Trigger failsafe. Now!" But the failsafe systems didn't respond. Screens glitched. Controls froze. The Wixarian fortress, pride of 5 empires, was helpless. Evan tapped the glass lightly with his knuckles. "Long time down here, huh? You must be bored out of your skull." The warrior tilted its head slightly to the side, a movement almost bird-like, almost curious. For something that had been painted in nightmares for centuries, it showed no immediate aggression, no roaring rage, no death sentence, only interest. Evan crossed his arms and leaned casually against the thick glass. "You know," he said, "where I come from, we don't usually chain folks up without at least hearing their side of the story." A tremor passed through the fortress, deep, slow, like the world itself exhaling. No one could tell if it came from the warrior, or something else waking up. Above, the council representatives, diplomats, and security heads watched in horror. The human wasn't dead yet. Worse, he was talking to it, engaging it. He's going to get himself, and all of us, killed, a silver-skinned ambassador whispered. Another, a 4-eyed strategist from the Jylak Dominion, slammed a fist onto the console. "Shut down the link! Shut it down now!" But nothing responded. Inside Cell Zero, Evan continued. He spoke of Earth, of the messy, stupid beauty of humanity, of wars fought and forgiven, of mistakes made and mended, of stubbornness and hope. His words drifted into the silence like paper boats on a black ocean. The warrior's breathing, if it could be called that, grew heavier, more measured. The chains binding its wrists shivered as if they, too, were waking up from a long, cold dream. And then, impossibly, a voice answered. It was not like a human voice, no vibrations, no soft tones. It cracked across the air like the splitting of ancient stone. One word, one question: why? It wasn't a threat. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even confusion. It was something far deeper, like a mountain after centuries of silence, asking why. The river had stopped running. Evan's smile softened just a little. He straightened from the glass and slipped his hands into his pockets, as if talking to an old friend on a front porch. "Because," he said simply, "everyone deserves a second chance. Even the scary ones." Above them, in the observation deck, someone collapsed onto a console, mumbling prayers in 3 different dialects. It didn't make sense. For millennia, the ancient warrior had been a weapon of extinction, a black mark in the archives of dozens of dead civilizations. No one had survived its awakening. No one had dared even attempt communication. Now, after all these centuries, it had not destroyed, it had not lashed out, it had spoken, and it had chosen to speak to a human. The fortress trembled again, more violently this time. Somewhere deep, below, emergency reactors flickered and died. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a bloody hue. "He's destabilizing it," a general barked. "Pull him out, now!" Teams of armored guards scrambled to the lower levels, rifles primed. Emergency, Override codes screeched across broken comms, but it was too late. Inside Cell Zero, Evan took a slow step closer. The glass between them shimmered, either from the heat of the warrior's presence or from the fortress's failing systems, but it remained intact. For now, the warrior watched him, studied him. It wasn't anger that burned in its gaze anymore. It was something harder to define. A brittle, exhausted hunger, a search for something lost, and for the first time in recorded history, the ancient destroyer, the ender of worlds, listened. The guards reached the final checkpoint just as Evan smiled again and asked almost playfully, "You want to get out of here?" The silence that followed was a different kind of heavy, not fear, not anger, something colder, sharper, recognition. The warrior lowered its head slightly, an ancient motion that spoke of battles long buried under forgotten stars. It shifted against its chains, and the thick alloys groaned in protest. Across the flickering comms, high above in the observation decks, panicked orders and counter-orders clashed like crashing waves. Scramble recovery teams, seal the lower decks, alert the Central Council, but down here, none of it mattered. Inside Cell Zero, Evan waited, steady, patient, as the ancient creature seemed to weigh him on some unseen scale. Finally, it spoke again, voice low and jagged like stone, grinding against stone. Long ago. It paused, as if tasting the words, remembering how language once worked. We built the first fires, made the first wars. Evan took a slow breath, staying still, letting the warrior speak. We rose, we burned, we ruled. The warrior's hands flexed slightly in their bindings, sparks hissing against suppression fields. But others feared us, not for what we destroyed, but for what we remembered. A shiver ran through Evan's spine. This wasn't some mindless weapon, caged for its violence. It was a memory, a living record of crimes too monstrous to be recorded in any official archive. The galaxy's first civilizations hadn't defeated it. They had betrayed it and then buried the truth. Above, in the council chambers, holographic, feeds from Cell Zero showed everything, every whispered word, every glint of dangerous understanding in Evan's eyes. Panic bloomed like a virus among the dignitaries. "If that creature speaks freely," a reptilian diplomat snarled, "every citizen in the core worlds will know what we did." A Ixarian general, face pale beneath his ceremonial implants, barked into a private channel, "Prepare contingency Omega, no witnesses." Back in Cell Zero, Evan crouched near the glass, voice low. "They made you into the villain," he said, "and then buried the pieces." The warrior tilted its head again, chains rattling softly. "Buried deep," it agreed, "and taught their children that silence is peace." Evan's hands tightened into fists at his sides. How many planets had been sterilized? How many civilizations erased? How many young species had been taught only the bright, clean lie of galactic unity? While their histories smoldered in ruins, no one dared map. "You remember it all, don't you?" Evan asked. The warrior didn't answer with words. Instead, the walls of the chamber trembled as the ancient being exhaled, and images bled into Evan's mind. Burning skies, fallen cities, great towering archives shredded and cast into the void. Empires rising not from wisdom, but from the silent ashes of genocide, and above it all a single constant, the architects of the galaxy wearing smiles of peace while their boots crushed histories underfoot. Evan staggered back, gasping, the taste of ancient smoke burning in his throat. It wasn't just history, it was present. The Galactic Order wasn't a government. It was a graveyard with gilded gates. Above, hidden behind layers of steel and corrupted systems, assassins in black armor were already moving. Silent squads, bred for invisibility, dispatched from secret corridors. They carried no insignia, no traceable marks. Their orders were simple: kill the human, kill the warrior, erase the memory. The Fortress AI, hacked to silence alarms, watched passively as the black-clad units moved through abandoned maintenance tunnels towards Cell 0. In the chamber, Evan wiped blood from his nose and straightened. Up, he met the warrior's ancient gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a monster but a soldier, a survivor. "I'm going to get you out of here," Evan said. The warrior leaned forward slightly, chains humming louder, ancient strength pulsing. Beneath the surface. "Why?" it asked again, softer this time. Evan smiled, grim and certain. "Because someone's got to break the silence." Far above, on a secure comm line linked only to the highest levels of galactic leadership, a command was issued. Omega confirmed. "Erase them both." The black-clad assassins primed their weapons as they reached the final bulkhead. Time was running out, and Evan Cross had just declared war. The first explosion hit like a hammer blow. The floor beneath Evan bucked, tossing him against the reinforced glass of Cell 0. Sirens wailed half-heartedly, systems too corrupted to scream properly. Somewhere deep in the fortress, the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the world in flashing blood-red pulses. Then the doors at the far end of the corridor blew inward. Black-armored soldiers poured through the smoke, weapons drawn, moving, with the cold efficiency of those trained to erase witnesses without hesitation. They didn't shout. They didn't warn. They simply raised their rifles and fired. Evan dove instinctively, a streak of plasma vaporizing the space where his head had been a second ago. He scrambled for cover, heart pounding, mind racing. They weren't here to capture him. They were here to bury him. Inside Cell 0, the warrior surged against its chains, the restraint straining with a high-pitched shriek. Its burning eyes tracked the assassins, ancient instincts stirring like a leviathan waking from a long slumber. Outside, Evan spotted a control panel half embedded in the wall, a manual override. High risk, unauthorized, severe consequences. He grinned grimly. "Yeah," he muttered, crawling toward it under a hail of plasma fire. "Severe consequences sound about right." Two more explosions rocked the hallway, throwing the assassins momentarily off balance. Evan slammed his fist against the panel, ignoring the crack of bone and the searing pain that followed. Manual override engaged. The glass walls of Cell 0 rippled, once, twice, before shattering into molten shards. And then the world went still. The warrior rose slowly, chains slipping from its arms like water off stone. It stood to its full terrifying height, towering over Evan and the soldiers alike. Its armor shimmered with ancient sigils that pulsed and reformed as if breathing. The assassins hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, it was enough. The warrior moved, not with rage, but with a cold, surgical precision honed over millennia. It seized the nearest soldier and hurled him against the ceiling hard enough to leave a red stain. Another assassin fired point blank, but the warrior's hand snapped out, catching the bolt mid-air, crushing it into a harmless flicker. The corridor became a slaughterhouse. Evan, breathing hard, scrambled behind a fallen console and watched as the legend unfolded before him. Not a mindless beast, but a master of war, brutal and unstoppable. Still, they kept coming. More black-armored units spilled into the hallway, weapons spitting death. Evan ducked as a shot sliced past his ear, feeling the heat of it sear his skin. The warrior turned toward him briefly, those burning eyes assessing, calculating, and then, impossibly, it moved to shield him. With one arm, it deflected a barrage, meant for Evan. With the other, it smashed into the wall, creating a gaping exit through 20 feet of fortress steel. Evan scrambled to his feet, chest heaving. "Move!" he shouted. Together, man and myth sprinted through the chaos, alarms wailing like dying animals behind them. Emergency lockdowns slammed doors shut, forcing them to take a twisting, desperate route through the fortress's dying heart. Outside, the skies boiled with incoming gunships, an entire fleet descending to erase the mistake the Council had buried too long. Evan skidded to a halt in a ruined loading bay, looking up at the incoming storm of enemies. They were too many, too fast, too late to run. Beside him the warrior stood calmly, flexing ancient fingers, rolling massive shoulders like a predator preparing for its final charge. Evan glanced sideways, a bitter laugh escaping his cracked lips. "Any bright ideas, big guy?" The warrior knelt, just like that, one knee sinking into the shattered concrete, chains still dangling from its wrists like broken promises. Head bowed, weapons fire rained down in the distance. Sirens howled. Death approached. But in that moment, all Evan could hear was the warrior's voice, low and sure. "I am yours." Evan stared, stunned. Not a weapon, not a monster. A choice, his choice. A wild grin spread across Evan's battered face. "Then let's give 'em hell." Behind him the fortress trembled again, not from damage, but from something deeper waking in its foundations, something ancient, something furious, and for the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy would remember why this warrior had once been called the Endmaker. The galaxy was not ready for the storm that followed. Within hours of their escape, hidden transmissions began flooding the outer systems. Images, voices, memories buried beneath centuries of censorship and lies, recordings of planets erased from star charts, testimonies from survivors who had lived long enough to whisper the truth. Files sealed under the highest galactic clearances now streamed freely across public channels, and at the center of it all, a human with a crooked smile, and a being who was supposed to be a myth. Evan Cross stood before a stolen transmitter deep inside a derelict freighter, broadcasting to every corner of the known systems. His words were sharp, cutting through decades of propaganda like a blade. "Through silk. You were told to forget," Evan said, voice carrying across space itself. "You were taught to fear the wrong enemy." Behind him, the ancient warrior stood silent, a living monument to the betrayal that had shaped the galaxy. "We're not here to conquer," Evan continued. "We're here to remind you what they buried beneath your feet." And the galaxy listened. On industrial worlds, workers threw down their tools and turned to the skies. On pleasure planets, dancers and dreamers whispered about lost cities and forgotten heroes. On border colonies, long left to rot, the embers of old rebellions flared to life. The council chambers, once centers of calm, erupted into chaos. What are they doing? "Shut it down. Track the signal. Mobilize every fleet." But it was too late. The message had spread beyond control, a virus of memory. Fear gripped the rulers harder than any weapon ever could. It wasn't just that Evan and the warrior had escaped. It was that they had woken something, hope. And hope was harder to kill than any rebel fleet. Far above a war-torn moon, in orbit around a dying sun, the greatest fleet ever assembled took shape. Thousands of warships, juggernaut dreadnoughts the size of continents, stealth killers from the blackest edges of space, mercenary battalions whose loyalty was measured only in credits and terror, every weapon the Council had ever hidden, every merciless arm of their power, pointed now at one tiny blip on the galactic map. One human, one warrior. No negotiation, no trial, just obliteration. The supreme executor of the Council, a being of pure crystalline intelligence, stood before a sea of holographic admirals. "The infection must be burned out," it said, its voice slicing through the command decks. "Leave. No trace, no survivors. Their story dies with them." Across light years, engines roared to life, plasma coils whined. Ancient weapons, older than recorded history, were woken from their slumber. The hunt had begun. Meanwhile, in the battered freighter, Evan watched the ancient warrior recalibrating a primitive star map projector, its massive hands surprisingly gentle. "We just painted a pretty big target on our backs," Evan said, dropping into a rusted chair, the exhaustion finally creeping into his bones. The warrior didn't look up. "Targets invite action. Action invites change." Evan laughed, a raw sound. "Yeah, well, I'd prefer action that doesn't get me vaporized in the next 24 hours. The warrior finally turned, something almost resembling a smile cracking the ancient lines of its face. "You awaken what was forgotten. That always demands a price." Evan tilted his head, studying the towering being across from him. "You really think we have a chance?" The warrior's burning gaze softened, just slightly. One ember can raise a forest, one voice can shatter an empire. The ship's proximity alarms blared, cutting through the moment. Evan scrambled to the cracked window and felt his stomach drop. On the far edge of the system, streaks of light, thousands of them, poured out of hyperspace like a river of fire. The Council's fleet had arrived, a force so massive it blotted out the stars. The warrior stood beside Evan, unshaken. "No retreat," it said. "No retreat," Evan echoed, his fists clenching. The old freighter creaked and groaned as its aging shields flickered to life, utterly outmatched, utterly outgunned. But Evan smiled anyway. They hadn't come this far just to run. If they were going to fall, they'd fall loudly, and they'd light a fire the Council could never extinguish. The first wave of enemy ships began their approach, weapons charged. Evan leaned toward the comms and flipped a switch, grinning into the open channel. "This is Evan. Cross," he said, voice steady, defiant. "To anyone who can hear me, remember this moment." The warrior drew itself to full height, armor humming with ancient power. No longer chained, no longer silenced. Together, human and myth stood against the end of the world, and as the sky filled with the Council's wrath, Evan whispered under his breath, "Let's make history." The first shots lit up the void like newborn suns. Council warships, sleek and monstrous, unleashed their fury with mechanical precision. Waves of plasma, particle lances, gravity bombs, all hurled toward the battered freighter, drifting helplessly in the darkness. It should have ended in seconds, but it didn't, because as the first barrage roared forward, the ancient warrior stepped onto the fractured hull, unprotected, unafraid. And with a sweep of its hand, something impossible happened. The air itself screamed. The laws of physics bent. The first wave of plasma bolts shattered harmlessly against an unseen shield, a relic of an age when gods walked among stars. Inside the freighter, Evan Cross stared through the viewport, awe fighting with sheer disbelief. The warrior stood alone against an armada and held. For a moment, even the Council commanders hesitated. This wasn't a fight. It was defiance made flesh, and it was contagious. From the mining moons of Voris to the floating gardens of Lylan Prime, people who had watched Evan's broadcasts rose up. They seized weapons hidden for generations. They stormed Council outposts, overran garrisons, pulled down the statues of those who had ruled by fear. The revolt was no longer a rumor. It was a wildfire, and Evan and the warrior had lit the match. Above the freighter, a second wave came, harder, faster. The warrior moved through the storm of fire like a phantom, deflecting, dismantling, daring the Council to do worse. But even ancient strength had its limits. A salvo of dark matter torpedoes slammed into the ship's flank, sending Evan tumbling through the bridge in a shower of sparks and broken metal. Systems failed. Oxygen vented. The ship was dying. Dragging himself upright, blood trickling down his temple, Evan grabbed the emergency comms unit. "This is Evan Cross," he rasped. "If you ever wanted a galaxy worth living in, now's the time to fight." He didn't know if anyone heard him, but across thousands of worlds, millions did. Merchant ships armed their mining lasers and joined the rebellion. Exiled warriors returned from forgotten moons. Even defectors from the Council's own fleets turned their guns against their former masters. The battle wasn't a battle anymore, it was a reckoning, and it was beautiful. On the freighter's hull, the warrior faltered, one knee striking the steel. A barrage of gravitic rounds tore through its ancient armor, spraying molten fragments into the void. Evans stumbled out of the dying ship, dragging a battered exosuit onto his body. Through the fractured gravity field, he sprinted toward the warrior, dodging debris and fire. He reached it as it collapsed, still shielding the freighter from annihilation. "No!" Evan gasped, grabbing the warrior's massive arm. "You don't get to fall. Not now." The warrior turned its burning eyes on him, still fierce but dimmer now, the light fading. "Not falling," it rumbled. "Rising." And with the last reserves of its strength, it rose again, lifting Evan onto its armored shoulder like a standard raised before a charging army. Around them, rebel fleets boiled out of hyperspace. Human, alien, hybrid, all flying under no banner but hope. The Council's armada tried to regroup, tried to crush the uprising before it could spread further, but it was too late. The galaxy's forgotten children had remembered their anger. They had remembered the cost of silence, and they would not be silenced again. The battle raged for hours, days by some counts. Whole sectors burned, empires collapsed into ash and radio screams. When the dust finally cleared, when the last Council dreadnought broke apart in a rain of shattered metal, the freighter was gone, vanished into the black, carrying its two legends. Somewhere into the vastness, statues were raised afterward, not of kings, not of conquerors, but of a man who spoke truth, and a warrior who listened. They became more than heroes. They became a promise that no matter how deep the lies were buried, no matter how strong the chains were forged, there would always be someone stubborn enough, reckless enough, human enough to break them. Across every colony, on every surviving world, their story was told. Children wore imitation battle armor in games. Pilots painted Evan's crooked smile on their ships. Rebels whispered prayers to the nameless warrior who had once shielded a fragile dream. In time, many forgot the exact battles, the politics, the betrayals, but they never forgot the feeling that one voice could change a world, the feeling that even an empire could be made to kneel, and in the quiet spaces between stars, where new civilizations would one day rise from the ruins, a simple phrase survived, etched into the heart of every survivor. We are the ember. We are the storm. We are the impossible memory.